Thanks everyone for joining me for this discussion on lessons of 3 years of human-centred design. It's really exciting to me to be able to present this because it was my colleague, Kate Fazio, who is unable to be here, unfortunately, so you just have me, but it was her visiting this conference back in January 2016 that led us to embark on a journey of discovery and a journey of human-centred design within our organisation, Justice Connect. So it's very exciting for me to be able to come back 3 years later and present some of the lessons that we've learnt in doing that process, and maybe some insights into ways that you might be able to avoid the problems we encountered, and in that true spirit of collaboration, which I've been talking about with a lot of people over the last 2 days, learn from each other. So to kick off, my name's Brendan Lakota and I'm the Head of Pro Bono Partnerships at Justice Connect, and I'll talk a little bit more throughout the presentation about the work that we do at Justice Connect, as I know it will not be familiar to many of the people in this room. So where I want to start is with the users. These are the people that we were building for. These were the help seekers. And Shannon yesterday in her plenary session in the morning, I think, said it really well. We're not building technology, we're not building new processes for the sake of being technologists. We're doing it because we're trying to help people. So these are real sketches of real people. These were the people that we were testing all of our prototypes throughout this human-centred design project. We'll talk a little bit about these users and how we engaged with them, the prototyping we did. We'll talk a little bit about why we started on the project. And then we'll talk a bit more about human-centred design, the evaluation we did, and some of the lessons from it. So Justice Connect is an organisation that helps to close the access to justice gap using pro bono. So we do direct legal service delivery on the ground to self-represented litigants in courtrooms. We provide fact sheets, we provide guided pathways online, we provide pro bono referrals and act as a clearinghouse. And we also advise not-for-profits on governance and charity law because we believe that helping the helpers can actually have a net benefit gain for society. If not-for-profits and charities are well governed and they know what they're doing and they're operating efficiently, well, that's better for everybody. The sort of clients that we work with, so we operate a homelessness prevention legal clinic that's operated in a health justice partnership model. So we work really closely with health professionals and social workers. We actually have a number of social workers on our staff that are delivering social work in concert with legal advice. And we do a lot of work with secondary consultation. So a social worker or a health worker has a direct line to our lawyers and can test their ideas and check whether there might be a legal issue. So we make sure that we're identifying legal problems early. We work with refugees on protection claims where people might be seeking protection in Australia or they might be about to be mandatorily deported from Australia. For those of you who want to hear more about that horrific regime, grab me later. We do workplace rights for people in court, so for self-represented litigants who are standing at the courtroom door, we provide direct advice to them. And as I said, we provide advice to charities and not-for-profits. And we do all of this through leveraging pro bono from member law firms. So law firms are members of Justice Connect, and we make sure that the pro bono that they want to do makes a difference. So they come to us and say, we're interested in LGBTIQ rights, or we're interested in refugee rights. And we'll dig into our network and find opportunities for them to leverage their pro bono to make sure that work makes a difference. But despite all of that work, as you would all know, there is a huge access to justice gap, and that exists in Australia as much as it exists in the US. We know that millions of people are missing out on legal help every year, and we know that those legal issues are having a huge impact. We did some research, or an organisation in Australia called the New South Wales Law and Justice Foundation, and I commend that organisation to any of you to have a look if you're interested in that sort of empirical, evidence-based approach to coming up with legal solutions. they did some work a few years ago that looked at the impact of legal problems, and they found that 50% of people with a legal problem had a consequential financial problem, relationship problem, housing problem, or health problem that they rated as either moderate or severe, that was directly linked to their legal problem. So we know that helping people's legal problems has huge net positives. And I know this is preaching to the converted in this room. So we've been doing this work now we just had our 25th anniversary 2 years ago. So we're coming on to 30 years old at this point. So we've been doing it for a long time. We know what we do works, but we know that we can't do enough of it, and we know that it's really resource intensive. We know that 14% of Australians live below the poverty line, but only 8% are eligible for legal aid. So we know that there are just people who are just not getting the legal help they're doing. Our organisation had more that we could offer, but we weren't able to meet the need. We were already doing as much as we could with the resources we had. We spoke to our law firms, we spoke to our member firms, and they said, yeah, there's 50 of them, there's 10,000 lawyers across them, 40,000 pro bono hours a year, and they wanted to do more, but they couldn't find efficiencies within their own pro bono programs to deliver more. So we were too complex, much of our work was too hard to scale, and we didn't have enough people, and we certainly didn't have enough money. So we set out to ask 3 questions. How could we be more accessible to people who needed legal help? How could we work better with our pro bono members and leverage more of the pro bono they wanted to offer? And how could we work smarter internally so that our staff were applying their effort where it had the highest impact and increase our own internal efficiency? And we knew that to answer those questions, we had to engage with these people here. We had to engage with the users. We engaged with clients, we engaged with lawyers, with law firms, with staff and volunteers. And I think that's really an important point, is when you're thinking about your users and you're embarking on a human-centred design process, get that audience right from the start. Know who you're solving for. In our case, because of those 3 questions we were trying to solve for, users, help seekers, law firms, and our internal staff, we had to speak to all 3. If we'd only spoken to one bit of that group, then we wouldn't have been able to come up with what I think is a solution that has been working very well for the last two years as it continues to grow. So what we did was we ran a deep human-centred design process over 12 months and came up with a plan to create 3 products that would fundamentally change the way that we work at Justice Connect. And when we say deep human-centred design project, we meant it. So we didn't just do research at the beginning, we've followed co-design principles throughout the process. We've had our clients and potential clients telling us what they needed, we had them ranking ideas, we had them testing prototypes. And then we had our 50 law firms working with us. When we got to the prototyping phase where we had an MVP that people could use, we had 14 of those law firms, including some that may be familiar to you in this country, agree to be guinea pigs and test the MVP. They worked really closely with us and they helped us refine it, and that actually led to them being champions for it. So when it came to trying to engage our other 36 law firms past the initial 14, they were willing to actually talk about why this was a good thing for them, and it helped with the change management process, which I know can be really difficult when you're trying to engage people in new projects. So with this group of users, we held interviews, we did workshops, we did observations, we did surveys, you name it, we probably tried it. And what comes next is really the lessons from that process, and hopefully something that you'll all find valuable if you do try and use human-centred design to come up with your own solution in the future. So over 3 years of work, we released 3 products. An online intake tool, which is a channel to allow people to apply for legal help from Justice Connect online with real-time eligibility feedback. It's not the only way to access our service, but it is growing. And one of the things we think is really interesting, one of the insights from this, is that users that we didn't think were going to want or use an online tool are actually some of the main users. I think there was somebody in a presentation earlier today or yesterday afternoon who was talking about how online tools have actually become quite useful for people who speak English as a second language, even if they're not translated, because they can be quite accessible. People can access them in your own time, and if you craft the language well and use plain English, people with low English literacy can still use them to get illegal help where they may not be able to access it over the phone. We built a referrer tool to help our sector peers understand our service and refer people directly into us, so they could get that same real-time eligibility feedback to know if they were sending someone to us, whether we were actually likely to be able to assist, which was something that all of our sector peers who wanted to refer to us but didn't know if they could really wanted. And then we built our pro bono portal that provides intelligent management of sending of our pro bono matters to our law firms, where we're algorithmically matching opportunities to do pro bono with the interests of those law firms based on what they've told us and our own data about the work they want to do and the matters they pick up. And it's been working. This isn't something that we're just want to test out. This is something we've now been running all three of these things for at least the last 12 months, and some of them for longer. As of today, or last week, we're actually able to use these three tools to leverage the pro bono response to the bushfires. We've been able to use the referral tool to accept referrals from people out in the field who are at the disaster recovery centres and wanting to send pro bono matters into us but not sure if we can help. They're getting that real-time eligibility assessment. We're able to rapidly introduce new interest areas into the pro bono platform for people who wanted to assist with the bushfire recovery. So we've been able to work really closely with partners using these tools to develop specific bushfire referral pathways for people who want legal help. We've been able to open up our tech to any law firm, not just our members, but any law firm in Australia who wants to provide legal help to people affected by the bushfires. And we've been able to set up a new online expression of interest form to collect information for people who want to volunteer and help to coordinate their efforts to understand where they want to volunteer and how. So what we have now are not only some products that we're proud of, but some insights into the process we've used and how you can use human-centred design in a resource-constrained not-for-profit, and how to sustain the use of human-centred design over a 3-year project. So before I get on to the lessons, let's really talk to one of those users and let's hear from what Sue has to say.
I put something in writing over a dispute with people in the community, and the next thing you knew, I was being sued. I hadn't dealt with the courts before, and I did not know where to turn. I researched as to lawyers in the area, and anyhow, they were too expensive, beyond my means. Yeah, my daughter did her little bit for me and came up with this online application that you could make. She sent that through to me and said, fill that in and we'll send it off. And so that's how I approached Justice Connect.
It was a really exciting time for Justice Connect because we had just launched this online tool. Sue's matter was one of the first ones that came to us. It was really exciting to see that that matter had come through and it was something that we could assist with.
They connected me with a firm who would do the case for me, and pro bono. Certainly couldn't finance a legal case on a pension.
We were of the view that Sue's claim had merit, and that it was certainly a matter that we felt that she required some assistance with. At that stage we had a sense of how stressful this might be for Sue. It was also very much about sort of satisfying her that everything was okay.
That just gave me hope that I wasn't about to lose everything that I'd worked for all my life.
We already had all of Sue's information, we had a background on the matter, so it was so much easier for us to determine whether or not we could help her. And now that we have a pro bono portal that our firms can access as well, it makes that process so much faster again.
As the matter neared its conclusion, there definitely was a shift in Sue from, she understood what she was facing, she understood the law, she understood the risks, she understood the merits, and I think she felt comfortable within the process, and she certainly felt comfortable with us here at Caroline O'Dea. Whether or not it's a fee-earning matter or whether or not it's pro bono, we're here to help.
Oh, the weight has lifted, definitely, and I'm so appreciative. I am really grateful for the way in which it was given, the generosity and the way it was delivered to me.
Now, I really like Sue's story because it's one of the ones that was, as you heard, it is one of the first matters that was placed through this new process of online intake, referral and pro bono portal. And it's a client that a lot of the people within the organisation, when we were first testing assumptions, said would never actually want to use an online tool. It's an older client who, with the assistance of her daughter, was able to get help through an online setting. So we found that to be a really interesting insight. So, what were our lessons from 3 years of this process that led to us being able to help people like Sue? So starting with the right foundations was incredibly important. So spending time to get those foundations right will help you down the track. For us, those foundations were a supportive internal culture. We had 2 chairs of our board and 2 CEOs in the life of this project over the last 3 years, but luckily every single one of those people was committed to the human-centred design process, and they were committed to the outcomes that we were trying to achieve. It's a common frustration talking to other people who are trying to use human-centred design in a legal setting. They feel like they're fighting against internal inertia. So if you can get that internal support, it's incredibly important and will help you on your project. If you're struggling to get that internal support, I've got some tips on that later. The second foundation we found incredibly helpful was curiosity about the solution and openness to different outcomes. One of the biggest challenges you'll face in trying to undertake a human-centred design project in a not-for-profit legal setting is people want to know what you're going to build. They want to know the outcome. And human-centred design processes don't let you do that. That's the point. You don't know what you're going to build from the outset. And that can be really tricky. It can be tricky to explain to staff. It can be tricky to explain to your board. And it's really tricky to explain to funders. You go to a funder and say, I'd like $300,000. Okay, what are you going to build? I don't know. It doesn't often play very well. But what you can have is clearly articulated goals. You can have outcomes that you want to achieve and the problem you want to solve. And that is really important. So understanding that and being willing to use that process and be comfortable with uncertainty is incredibly important. Having a project plan that supports the realities of human-centred design. This is incredibly important as a foundation to these sorts of projects. If you try and use a traditional project plan that says you will have X widget produced by X date, then you'll struggle to meet it, and it can make it really tricky to recover, and to recover that sense of trust with funders and with other supporters. So similar to internal challenges, there can be challenges pitching that to funders. For those who aren't familiar with human-centred design and the methodology and how it might differ from your traditional style, so you traditionally would be looking at a thing like a waterfall style where throughout the project you've got set milestones. By month 3 you'll have produced a prototype, by month 4 you'll have produced a product, by month 5 you'll have produced whatever it might be. Human-centred design, you've got milestones where you will be in different phases and different times, but you won't know exactly what you'll have produced by that point. So finding funders who are willing to work with that is really important, but it's a continual challenge. Lesson 2, embed evaluation and iteration from the start. We're able to share some of these insights and some other data around what we did and how it worked and what didn't work because that was embedded right from the start. It's more work up front, but it's paying dividends now. It means that we're able to go to a funder and say, well, that previous bit of money you gave us that let us do this work has led to a 17% growth in our referrals. We're up to 44% more efficient because of this work. We're now doing 42,000 pro bono hours a year. That sort of monitoring and evaluation is incredibly important, but it has to be embedded from the start. And if you do want to know more about that work, I actually have some annual reports up here, but you can also find them online on the slides. The iteration and that monitoring process also means that you can release MVPs. It means that you can release something when it's early on, just in an MVP phase, test it and make sure you're heading in the right direction. It means that instead of raising money to buy a car, build the car, and then realise you need a boat, you can take this slow process that lets you just add bits along the way and redirect, pivot if you need to. So our 3 products that we've released are now all in 3 different phases of their iterative cycle. Our intake tool is already at version 2, and we're working on version 3, ready for release in April. Our referrer tool, version 1's released. We're currently in an evaluation part of that cycle and ready to launch a new version of that, hopefully by the end of the year. And our portal is in version 1, that's been released, and version 2 is looking for released and evaluated, and version 2 is looking for release in March. Our third lesson, I think, goes to the heart of human-centred design. To do it well requires genuine inclusion, and that means genuine inclusion requiring time and effort, but it's really worth it. When recruiting people, you do need to speak to the extreme users. They are the ones that are going to give you inspiration and insight. But they're also going to be the ones that either would never use your service in the first place or don't need your service because they already know what you do. They're a power user. They don't need to use a product. They don't need to use a tool. They already know it in and out. So it's important to talk to them and to understand the extreme users, but it's important that you validate your ideas with the people in the middle. To do that, we've now developed a whole series of templates that we use internally whenever we're running this sort of consultation. And these are our key things that we make sure that we've got in place for every consultation that we do. These are also really useful artifacts to show to funders because funders like to, even if you're not able to tell them exactly what the product will be at the end, they like to see that there's a process in place. And if you're able to show these sort of artifacts to people, it can give them confidence in the work that you're doing. The fourth lesson was lawyers love making assumptions, and they can be tough to bust. And this goes back to my earlier slide about building a supportive culture. Even if people aren't supportive to begin with, if you're able to do genuine consultation and work directly with users and come up with ways to test assumptions, then you will find that people will be much more engaged and much more supportive of using a human-centred design process. And it can be tricky in a legal environment. There's a bunch of traits about lawyers that makes them not great designers. They love looking backwards. They love following precedent. They're highly analytical, but they hate data. They love anecdotes and case-based decision-making. Very few lawyers have training in research or data science, and lawyers are trained to give advice, but less so to receive it. So your average lawyer is not a natural fit for a product developer, where openness, curiosity, systems and critical thinking, and data-driven decision-making play really important roles. So if you want to engage lawyers in this process, you're going to have to bust some assumptions. And the best way to do that is with real people. These were some of the assumptions that we hit right from the start. But as you will have seen from Sue, that weren't necessarily true. Now, that's not to say all older people would prefer an online tool. I'm certainly not advocating for that. But that assumption that no older people want an online tool is nonsense, and we know it's nonsense. And luckily, by working and engaging directly with users and engaging our lawyers in that process, we're able to bring them along, and that really helped with the change management process. Now, final lesson. Making and breaking things and not being precious is the only way for us to succeed. We had to prototype quickly and we had to test things. And this, I think, goes to the heart of that design process. So monitoring and evaluation, checking what we're doing, that's really helpful, and that was really important to help with what we changed in the prototypes. But then we needed to actually test it. And how could we do this? So the prototypes were just initial mock-ups or models. People would test them in whatever ways we could try and do them. And they allowed us to test what the MVPs might look like. And we used them in an iterative cycle. So what you see here are examples of some of the ways we tried to test different things. These prototypes are another thing that acted as a risk mitigation strategy and that funders like to hear about and that funders love to see them, even if they were only paper mock-ups. Here was also where we found another interesting insight about the lawyer psychology. Lawyers hate throwing stuff away, and they also hate putting stuff up when they know it's going to be challenged. So using prototypes when they were really early was really important. Using them when they were clearly draft. Just writing draft on the top was not enough. What they wanted was something that was really scrappy, because it meant that they were happy to criticise it. If they saw something that looked like you'd spent a lot of time and polish on it, they would say, oh, that's great, that's wonderful. And then you'd build it and you'd give it to them and they'd never use it. And they'd never tell you why. So we had to create spaces where that sort of engagement was encouraged, and that was difficult with lawyers. We also had to create lots of maps, and we had to create maps of maps to understand our maps. But that meant that we were able to really understand our processes about what was happening. Throughout the organisation, we had lots of written policies about what was working and what wasn't, or what was meant to happen. But what happened when we mapped them out and actually observed what people was doing is that they weren't following the written procedure at all, because it didn't work. So if we'd just gone and built based on what they gave us when they handed us their written procedure, we would never have gotten to where we did today. And then we had to simulate it. We had to create something that people could actually touch and feel. They let us cement people's thinking. They let us test things before we built them out into an MVP and before people became emotionally invested in the solution. As we went on and as we got further and further and closer to an MVP and closer to release, we spent a bit more time and a bit more money refining each prototype. And here's a couple of examples of things that we used. These aren't the only things that you can use, but if you're looking for some inspiration, these are good ones to start with. So we used Adobe, we used InVision, we used Pop, which is really interesting. So that lets you, it's just an app for your phone that you can take photos of paper prototypes and quickly convert them into digital prototypes, which is really cool. And the last one is paper, actual like physical sheets of paper. Not some fancy app called paper exclamation mark, just paper. And those were things that we found really useful because going back to the earlier point about lawyers not wanting to criticise things if they look too good, if you've just hand-drawn something on a sheet of paper, lawyers will shit all over it. So there's a hot tip. And then finally, going back to the users, back where we started, actually making sure you tested with the real people that were going to use the product. That was the only way that we were able to make sure that we were solving their problem, not some imagined version of their problem. So that's it. That is our 5 lessons of 3 years of human-centred design. I hope that they're helpful for you. We know that 3 years of coming to this conference has really helped us to get to where we have, and it's great to be able to give back. I think we're pretty much bang on time, but if you have any questions, I'll hang around. And I've also got a couple of cards or annual reports if people want to catch up and talk about this later. Thanks.